One of the silliest things that privileged folks do is to worry about the ultimate meaning and purpose of life, as if that had anything at all to do with our life here and now. And William Lane Craig is here to give us a master class in precisely that sort of silliness. Hey there, folks. Bertram the Barely Bearable Atheist here, continuing our series on the book On Guard by William Lane Craig. We's in the middle of Chapter 2, which is one big argument from consequences fallacy, where Dr. Craig tries to smear atheism by making it sound like life is hopeless and intolerable if there ain't no God. He's just got done claiming that life ain't got no meaning nor value without God, and now he's going to try and argue that life ain't got no purpose neither, as if that was a bad thing. Quote, "If death stands with open arms at the end of life's trail, then what is the goal of life? Is it all for nothing? Is there no reason for life? And what of the universe? Is it utterly pointless? If its destiny is a cold grave in the recesses of outer space, then the answer must be yes, it is pointless." End quote. Okay, and what exactly does that have to do with the price of eggs? See, the fallacy that Dr. Craig is making here is called a fallacy of composition, and specifically a fallacy of division. In other words, thinking that whatever's true of the whole must necessarily also be true of each of its parts. If in the universe as a whole ain't got no particular point nor goal, then everything within the universe must also have no point nor goal. And the same with our individual lives. If in life as a whole ain't got no particular point nor goal, then nothing within our individual lives, supposedly, can have any particular point or goal. And we all know that's false. It's a fallacy. Whatever's going to happen in 10 to the power of 106 years from now, it ain't got nothing to do with us here today. All we got to worry about is the stuff that happens during our own mortal lifetimes. Dr. Craig is cranking up the poetic language to 11, trying to work us up into a feeling of despair about stuff that we ain't never going to experience. And frankly, what's the point? What does that have to do with the price of eggs? We has concerns and interests here and now that we can do something about. And that's way more important to us than some entropic principle that ain't going to kick in until 10 to the power of 106 years from now. So what's the point of getting ourselves all upset about the end of the universe? Well, obviously the point is to try and get us all so emotional that we can't think clearly about the claims he's making. His stated goal for this chapter is to convince us that we'd rather be dead than live in a universe that ain't got no God. And he can't do that with reason and evidence, so he's turning to fallacies and emotion instead. Quote, "And what of man? Is there no purpose at all for the human race? Or will it peter out someday, lost in the oblivion of an indifferent universe?" End quote. Well, according to the Bible, the purpose of most of the human race is to suffer the agony of hell for all eternity. So you'll pardon me if I suggest that maybe we's all better off without any such purpose. We all got purposes of our own, and we don't need nobody else's purpose to compete with ours. But Dr. Craig is trying to make it sound like not having some kind of extrinsic purpose imposed on us is a bad thing somehow. Quote, "What is true of mankind as a whole is true of each of us individually. We are here to know purpose. If there is no God, then your life is not qualitatively different from that of an animal." End quote. And notice he says we are here to know purpose and not we are bound to no purpose other than our own. The way he says it make it sound like we got nothing, but the fact is we got plenty and we don't need what he's trying to sell us. Think about a really big telescope. Telescopes is great for looking at things so far away that we ain't never actually going to get there. But the problem is, if we spends all of our time looking at stuff we's never going to get to, we's going to miss the stuff that's right here in front of us, just like telescopes blocks your view of your immediate surroundings. And that's what Dr. Craig is trying to get us to do here. He wants us to be so focused on stuff we ain't never going to get to that we miss the stuff that's right here in front of us. After all, that's what he does himself, which is why he can't see the secular everyday purpose that's all around us, whether or not we believe in any God. We already got all the purpose we need, and we don't need any God to give us any more. The problem ain't that our lives lack purpose. The problem is that we live in a society that ain't got the best interests of its citizens in mind. No matter how much us Americans likes to sing about land of the free and home of the brave, our freedoms has eroded to the point that a lot of us is economically trapped into underpaid jobs and saddled with unmanageable debt. And that ain't an accident. Our policies is set by powerful, wealthy individuals who profit off other folks' labor, and they've been rigging the system for years to benefit themselves at the expense of working class folks. And when you're trapped in a system that reduces you to some degree or other of virtual slavery, that's going to give rise to feelings of frustration and hopelessness that's going to make you ask what the purpose of it all is. And them's the feeling that Dr. Craig is trying to exploit right here. But God ain't going to be any help, because the real problem ain't that we lack divine purpose, it's that we lack economic justice. The folks that does all the work don't get the profits, because the profits is skimmed off and handed over to wealthy shareholders who use it to pay for lobbyists to pass laws that rig the system even more in favor of the wealthy elite. And not only is God going to fail to fix that problem, Christian apologists is going to defend it and try and distract us with all this talk about eternal life and divine purpose. And then they're going to pass the offering plate. Whether or not Dr. Craig is doing this intentionally, his emphasis on the hopelessness of mortal life and his insistence that the true meaning of life lies on the other side of the grave has the function of stifling any attempt to find meaning and purpose in the life we got right now, such as, for example, actually fighting for economic justice and putting an end to capitalist corruption so that folks don't have to go through life feeling frustrated and exploited and hopeless. By selling the idea that mortal life ain't supposed to have meaning and purpose on its own, Dr. Craig is conditioning folks to be docile sheep, submitting meekly to the demands of their corporate overlord no matter how abusive they become. He may not mean to be doing that, but that's what he's doing. And that's why there's a high correlation between healthy, secular, socialist societies and high rates of unbelief. In societies that don't foster an artificial sense of hopelessness and frustration, the apologists' promise of divine purpose ain't got as much appeal. When folks is free to pursue their own interests and achieve their own goal, they ain't going to be as interested in somebody imposing a foreign purpose onto their lives, so they ain't going to respond when apologists offers them one. And that means fewer folks converting to Christianity. And by the way, what even is this so-called purpose that Dr. Craig wants us to believe is missing from our lives? Well, once again, Dr. Craig claims it's something we can't have without God, but somehow he never actually tells us what it is. Quote, "But more than that, even if life did not end in death, without God, life would still be without purpose, for man and the universe would then be simply accidents of chance, thrust into existence for no reason." End quote. So basically, he's saying that without God, we're free to pursue our own interests and goals, and he's trying to make it sound like that's the most horrifying fate that anybody could imagine. Maybe even he would tell us what this awesome, essential purpose actually is. We might have some reason to think we want it, but he never does. It's like them old aftershave commercials. Can't get a date? Buy our new aftershave. You still won't get any dates, but at least we sold another bottle of aftershave. But maybe we can have a look and see if we can't figure out what this mysterious and supposedly life-changing purpose is supposed to be. According to the Westminster Shorter Catechism, the chief purpose of man is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. That ain't a direct quote from the Bible, but it's a fair summary of what a lot of conservative evangelical folks believe. And the thing we need to remember is that conservative evangelical folks has lots of opinions about how other folks ought to behave. And their basis for claiming to have the right to demand that other folks obey their opinions is that these opinions supposedly comes from God. And never mind the fact that they decide which version of God is the right one based on whether or not He validates their opinions. When Christians glorify their own God, What they're doing is asserting the supremacy of the Christian God, which is the same as asserting Christian supremacy, full stop. The purpose of man is to glorify God, and the purpose of glorifying God is to promote Christian supremacy, which is a worldly, here and now, self-oriented goal on their part. And same for promoting the notion that serving God is the highest good and greatest joy that a human can experience. It's just more marketing hype aimed at declaring the supremacy of the Christian God, and thus Christian supremacy, full stop. It ain't ultimate purpose the way Dr. Craig's been trying to sell it. It's just thinly veiled self-promotion in an attempt to achieve social domination in the short term. But I digress. The main point is that after all this talk about life with God supposedly ain't got no meaning or value or purpose, turns out that Dr. Craig don't actually have any what he calls ultimate meaning, value, and purpose that any non-believer would have any interest in buying into. Not only ain't he got no ultimate meaning, value, and purpose, but the narrow vision of reality he's promoting is intended to blind us to the real world meaning, value, and purpose that every life has, whether folks is believers or not. It's a classic sales technique. Try and make folks dissatisfied with what they've got so they'll think they need whatever you're selling, even if they don't actually need it, and even if it don't actually work. Well, it's a truism that the less you has to say, the longer it takes you to say it, so Dr. Craig harps on about how we supposedly deceiving ourselves when we point out all the meaning and value and purpose that we has even without God. Quote, "But if God does not exist, then all we are left with is despair. Unfortunately, most people don't realize this fact. They continue as though nothing has changed." End quote. It's like being on an airplane cruising along at 30,000 feet, and the guy sitting next to you says, "There's no such thing as airplanes. We's all just falling to our deaths." And you say, "What do you mean? Of course airplanes exist. We're sitting in one right now." And the guy says, "Oh, you's just deceiving yourself 'cause you ain't realized yet that we's all falling to our deaths." And then the plane lands and the guy goes out to catch a connecting flight, still lamenting that folks is deceiving themselves about airplanes. It don't take no actual God existing for believers to pursue their own social dominance here and now, which is what Dr. Craig's actually doing here. That's an earthly goal that all kinds of religious folks pursues regardless of which God or gods they claim to worship. And that's the plane that Dr. Craig is riding on right now by the very fact that he is denying the existence of such secular purposes. He quotes a long excerpt from the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche, telling the story of a madman complaining that we've murdered God and now what are we going to do? But Dr. Craig don't ask why Nietzsche portrayed this view as the rantings of a madman. He don't give any of the philosophical context for this story. Instead, he says this, quote, "Nietzsche predicted that someday modern man would realize the implications of atheism, and this realization would usher in an age of nihilism, the destruction of all meaning and value in life." End quote. And yet, here he sits complaining about the fact that meaning and value and purpose ain't been destroyed at all, and that life goes on just fine even without any God. He's in denial of the fact that atheism ain't had all the horrific consequences he predicted, so he accuses us of deceiving ourselves. Airplanes is just an illusion, and we's all falling to our deaths and don't know it. Of course, like all apologists, Dr. Craig is an expert on how atheists view the world. Quote, "About the only solution the atheist can offer is that we face the absurdity of life and live bravely. Only by recognizing that the world really is a terrible place can we successfully come to terms with life. Camus said that we should honestly recognize life's absurdity and then live in love for one another." End quote. Dr. Craig is a highly intelligent and highly trained philosopher, and he's also a textbook case for why confirmation bias is a lousy guide to understanding what atheistic philosophers mean when they talk about life being absurd. Yes, if and you've been a slave your whole life and you suddenly find yourself free, you can experience a certain amount of culture shock when you realize you're on your own and has to take care of yourself. And Western society has, for many centuries, been basically enslaved to theocracy and theocratic assumptions. It ain't surprising that modern philosophers, having been trained in thousands of years of philosophies based on theological assumptions, and then finding out that God ain't real, would feel a certain amount of intellectual disorientation. They're going to frame their philosophies in the context of and in reaction to the mistaken assumptions of the past. But here's the thing. If and God ain't real, then we ain't really lost nothing but our delusions. It ain't that God used to be there and then he died and now he ain't got nobody in the driver's seat. It's that he ain't never been in the driver's seat. All the progress we've made has been progress we've made on our own. And whatever meaning and value and purpose we find in life is meaning, value, and purpose that's been there all along, even without him. We never needed him before, and we don't need him now. That's the good news of atheism. Well, that plus the fact that ain't nobody going to burn forever in hell. That's some pretty good news right there all by itself. But it's also good news that we can find meaning, value, and purpose in life without any gods. And in fact, we can do it better if we ain't under no delusions about supreme authorities that ain't really there. And also, Dr. Craig says, quote, about the only solution the atheist can offer is that we face the absurdity of life and live bravely, end quote. Well, that ain't true at all. As an atheist, I can look at the formal philosophies of the 18 and 1900s and say, so what? What's that got to do with the price of eggs? As Douglas Adams so famously put it, the answer to the life, the universe, and everything is 42. We're just asking the wrong question. And even though that's satire, it makes an important point. Stuff that happens after we's gone don't really matter, or at least not to us. What's important is the stuff that has an impact on our lives here and now. And philosophical speculation about the ultimate meaning of life, the universe, and everything ain't got nothing to do with the price of eggs. What does matter is the stuff that Dr. Craig says that Camus was talking about, accepting reality on its own terms and taking care of one another. That's what's going to affect life here and now in ways that you and I care about, so that's all that's truly important to us. But, of course, Dr. Craig ain't going to be happy with that approach. Quote, the fundamental problem with this solution, however, is that it's impossible to live consistently and happily within the framework of such a worldview. If you live consistently, you will not be happy, and if you live happily, it is only because you are not consistent. End quote. Dr. Craig calls this inconsistent because he superstitiously attributes the existence of meaning, value, and purpose to God, and therefore he assumes that if God does not exist, then meaning, value, and purpose can't exist neither. But that ain't an internal inconsistency with an atheistic worldview, because atheists ain't under no obligation to define meaning, value, and purpose in terms of some kind of ultimate divine agenda. My happy life as an atheist may be inconsistent with Dr. Craig's theistic worldview, but that don't make my life inconsistent with the worldview I actually hold. I got a worldview that don't require his God, and I'm living consistently with it, whether he likes it or not. And notice, in all this whole long discussion, he still ain't never explained what this supposed meaning, value, and purpose is that God supposedly provides and that atheists is missing. It's all by my aftershave because you ain't getting no dates, trying to sow acute emotional dissatisfaction in order to overcome our sales resistance. And even if we did buy what he's selling, it wouldn't help. Now, I ain't seen any Christian bookstores in a while, but back when they did exist, they used to have shelves full of books on how to find God's will for your life. God don't hand out meaning and value and purpose to believers on a magical silver platter. They has to find their own meaning and value and purpose the same way everybody else does, by setting their own goals and priorities based on real-world needs and resources in combination with their own personal ambitions and preferences. When it comes right down to it, the meaning and purpose that God supposedly gives to life is nothing more than the statement, God gives meaning and purpose to life. It's something Christians say to each other and to non-believers because that's what you're supposed to say. But when it comes to defining what exactly that meaning and purpose is supposed to consist of, either they won't be able to articulate it, or else they're going to give you some kind of secular meaning and purpose that they get the same ways as everybody else, apart from giving God the credit for it. And I'm sure there's more that could be said, but that's going to about do it for me for today. Next time, Dr. Craig is going to continue his attempt to smear atheism by accusing atheistic philosophy of failing to provide what he calls ultimate meaning, value, and purpose. And spoiler alert, he's going to fail again. Meanwhile, thanks for watching, and please be kind wherever possible.